Hi, this is Dr. Maggie Perry with Tell Me What You're Proud Of, and I'm here with Danielle. Danielle, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, can you tell me what was happening in your life when you decided to seek psychotherapy?
Yes. So this is essentially a 10-year story. When I first started, when I first sought therapy was 10 years ago, almost exactly. And Huddle.Care is kind of my seventh psychotherapy attempt. So when I first realized that I had an anxiety disorder, it was when I had moved in with my boyfriend, now my husband. And I finally saw myself through somebody else's eyes, in just a way that I never had before. And I finally realized that all of the things that I thought were my quirks were not were not the way that I had to be living. That I was like, oh, it's possible for people to think a different way than how I'm thinking and to suffer less. So I realized that, and I started my journey, which unfortunately has been a really long one because I only feel like in the last 12 months I've realized that I have OCD and not just generalized anxiety disorder. So, yeah.
Before we go on, can you say more about like you realize that other people think differently than you do and suffer less? Can you be more specific about that?
Yeah. So, for example, I would be worrying about full mouth x-rays that I had to get at the dentist every 3 years. I'd be worried about that 3-year mark in the future. And I kind of thought that that was normal because I had been such an anxious person all my life, kind of, especially, like when I was started coming of age and I had kind of I have complex PTSD, which I didn't have any idea of at the time. But now looking back, I can see that all these things were not just normal quirks, but were definitely a disordered way of thinking for sure. So that's one example. Or I would just get just extreme anxiety about flying. Yeah, the dentist one was a real big deal. And then I would just also just cry like all the time. And my husband, my then fiance or whatever, would ask uh, why I was crying, and I literally couldn't tell him. I just felt, this horrible sense of dread. And at the time, I really did think it was generalized. Now, looking back, I know it's specific, and I can see the stickiness and the content. I can now. I'm looking back. I can see that at the time it was, yeah.
Felt like worry. Yeah. So, can you talk more about what that process was like over the years since it has been a long journey?
Yeah. So um I basically I've seen. So the first therapist that I saw, she kind of recognized. That was 10 years ago, so I don't really remember that well. But she was the first person to mention the word trauma. She said, "You kind of remind me of my trauma patients," and that was the first time I was kind of blown away. I kind of bought into it. I kept it in the back of my mind for future. Um, but I just kind of saw her as general talk therapy, just like, I'm anxious. How do I deal with this? And then um, after a few months, it wasn't getting better. So my doctor put me on an SSRI. And at the time, I thought that like that was the solution and I didn't really need to continue with talk therapy. And then I moved to a different,
Can I slow you down?
yeah.
What did you think in terms of like the mechanism of action going from anxiety is something that I need to talk through with somebody that understands anxiety to I can just take a pill about that?
Mm.
What was the difference in you thinking about what was creating your anxiety?
Um, I think real talking, and again, I don't remember the specifics, and I've tried to recreate it since, but talking through my childhood and maybe the kind of some of the sources of my anxiety or trauma didn't help at all. And so I was seeing just a general physician, and she just kind of said, I think talk therapy can help some people, but I really think you need a drug. And I just kind of believed that. Um, and I think I was just in such like a deep, dark hole that I was, my anxiety had gone untreated for so long and unrecognized. So I was at that point pretty depressed. And so I was kind of desperate, and I trusted the doctor, and I chose the drug. And then I think I remember reading somewhere that just in like a general psychology book or something, that the best outcomes come from both medicine and therapy. It didn't specify, what kind of therapy or anything like that. So I had it in my mind that I wanted to continue in general going to a counselor in some capacity and be on a drug. It's just that when I moved and switched jobs, or, moved to a different state, didn't have that same therapist, and just kind of the the effort that it takes to go find somebody who's taking new patients, who's in your area, your new hometown, um, and that takes your insurance is, pretty daunting. So there was a time where I just took the drug and just kind of tried to skate by.
Hmm. Tell me more about the process from there.
So it didn't really work. Let's see, what I think I don't remember. Some things must have triggered me, and I found another therapist who took my insurance. And that next one focused, I didn't realize at first, but she focused on parts work. So I guess I must have, told her the trauma stuff and the complex PTSD. So she tried to do internal family systems with me, but I didn't really understand what it was. And I stuck with her because she was really compassionate, and I saw her for a long time. And she just kind of generally helped me feel a little bit better about life for a couple of years.
Hmm.
So yeah, I stuck with her for a bit, and the parts work just didn't help at all. So eventually I just stopped seeing her.
For other people that don't know what you're talking about in terms of internal family systems, can you say a little bit about what you mean by parts work?
Yeah, so it's this idea, and I'm definitely not that well versed in it, but it's the idea that you have a true self, but then you have other parts that kind of take over, that you maybe let take over in certain circumstances where, it's just too scary or too sad or too dangerous for you to handle it. And so the idea is that a manager will come out and try to hide your true self. Or, I think one example was, you have a creative part of you, and that free spirited creative part maybe took too many tequila shots and did something crazy that one time. So that was a part of you that was trying to, you know put yourself away so that you wouldn't get hurt, and come out and just kind of be the life of the party or something like that. um, but the idea was that, like, you have a child that is, so a part of you that is still, 8 years old or whatever when something bad happened, and that you've developed over the years, like, certain ways of dealing with that aren't your wisest mind, your truest self or something.
So I appreciate what you're saying, that your therapist was really compassionate and it kind of generally helped you feel better. Now, based on what you know about OCD, do you have a sense of why that parts work might not have been effective for you at that time?
Well, it had nothing to do about my behavior, and I was not aware at all about how about anything that I was doing to increase my anxiety. I was under the impression that if I figured out my past, that I would be healed. That all I had to do was have compassion for my young self, whose mom was sick, and then acknowledge and remember, maybe, and not blame myself for anything that happened. And then whatever anxiety I was having in the moment, or my day-to-day life in the present, would kind of dissipate. I think I thought that was true. And I didn't, wasn't in touch with what was really bothering me, my specific content triggers. I didn't know about OCD. I just thought that it was a, thing where people turn the doorknob a certain number of times and check the stove. Um, so I wasn't changing my behavior in any sense. I was just talking about my past mostly.
Thanks for describing that. Can you say more about what the journey was from there?
Yeah. So from there, I uh, basically, I'm skipping over some stuff, but I basically had a baby. and everything got really obvious, as to what exactly my worries were, and it became very specific. I was very worried that he would get sick. In fact, I mean, I was still worried in general. Yeah, I remember coming home from the hospital and just wanting to drop him off at daycare the next day, like at 2 days old, just because I felt, so extremely unprepared and scared of just anything that could happen to this human life. And it was very probably hormonal as well. But the worry was pretty extreme. And then my kid got his first stomach bug at like 9 months old, and I just had like a breakdown. I absolutely lost it. I just thought that it was, in a way, it was the end of the world. I realized that he is capable of being sick, and it could happen again at any time, and I can't prevent it, or maybe I can, and I should really think about ways to prevent it. Maybe I have like a lot of work to do, and I should pull him out of daycare and quit my job and protect him from ever getting sick. And or if I don't, then all I have to look forward to is uncertainty and sickness happening in life as a matter of course. So I realized that something was wrong. So I sought help with a postpartum kind of specializer counselor. So she was my next.
And what about the possibility of him being sick and you being unable to protect him? What about that made your world come crashing down?
I mean, I don't know. I think that's the OCD and the trauma, right? That's just how it felt. And my husband was pretty. I mean, he had by then he had known me, and I'd had similar reactions to him over the years at certain points if he got sick, where my worry just far exceeded the 24 hours that my husband was ill. My worry would go on for months and months, or a year later, I would remember, oh, it's been a year. Remember when you got food poisoning or whatever? Just almost like I was having more traumas, re-traumatizing myself or something. So he knew that was my tendency, but this time was so much different because we had a child and everything was more extreme. And yeah.
And when you're saying got sick, that's kind of a euphemism for a number of different things.
Mm-hmm.
So do you, is the word that's typically used when referring to getting sick, is that a trigger for you? Is it difficult to say those words?
It has been. It's gotten less difficult over the past couple of years.
And are you willing to let me use those words right now?
Yeah.
So you're talking about your son vomiting,
Yeah.
specifically vomiting. And
Yeah.
can you say my son might vomit?
Yeah.
Are you willing to say that now?
Yeah. That my son vomited.
So, and your fear is that your son might vomit?
Yeah. Or I'm afraid that I might throw up, or my husband might throw up, or my son might throw up.
And what's
Or
that like?
really anybody that I care about or that's in close proximity to me, if if I care about them. And it's not the vomit itself that gets me like this. I mean, it probably used to be, but I've had incidental exposure over the years. Like I got a small dog a few years ago, and um, she is a puker. She's just very pukely. And I didn't used to be able to even say the word puke. So she's done a lot for me in terms of exposure. Like, she threw up in the middle of the night last night on our bed, and we just went back to sleep.
Great
So
job.
she's done a lot for me. So I know like that's like a little microcosm of like, it gives me hope, right?
Good. Yeah. Really good perspective on that rather than that type of exposure and any reactions that you have to it, meaning that you're going to suffer forever. If it switches over to this is an example, this is an exposure, and it gives me hope that I can respond effectively, like responding effectively to it gives me hope. That's a really great shift in attitude.
Yeah, it's definitely a metaphor that helps when I remember it, when I remember to think about it. Because it's hard not to be hopeless. And then, if I do think about that, I think, oh, I am capable of, shifting the way I think towards this. When I first got her, and she was like my first baby, and I felt all the similar feelings that I felt when I had a human baby, of responsibility and worry and decision making, and like, how much vomiting is too much, and at what point do I make the decision to go to the vet in the middle of the night or go back to sleep? Is somebody going to die? Is my little tiny dog who relies on me to keep her safe, is she going to die? What am I going to make the right decision? So that journey was similar to the one that I started when I had my human baby.
All of that is really well said. Thank you for describing that. Do you want to go back to like once your human baby was born, what happened when you sought out a specialist?
Yeah, so she again had a lot of compassion, and a lot of knowledge in terms of like, what women typically deal with after they have a baby, and kind of the postpartum OCD, postpartum anxiety. Although she did not speak to me about OCD, I still didn't realize that I had it. Um, and this is getting pretty close to the present, but what she did with me without my knowing was EMDR. And the reason that I didn't know that that's what it was is because she wasn't putting her finger in front of my face and having my eyes move. She had like a different just method. She had me holding clickers, and I didn't know that's what she was doing until I talked to her about it afterwards. So EMDR to, I guess, tackle the trauma of my mom being sick when I was younger. Um, and it didn't help at all. I saw her every week for almost a year, I think a year. And I felt just as desperate and sad and scared as I did the day I first saw her.
And specifically worried that your son was going to get sick?
Yeah, I remember one time in her office saying, like, her trying to understand exactly what was making me cry in that particular moment. And I think what I said was he could be incubating a stomach flu bug right now as we speak. My husband's at home watching him. I'm here with you in this office, and it could be living inside him right now. And it could be, tonight he could pop, spike a fever, and tomorrow he could be throwing up, and the next day we could all be throwing up. And I just had so much fear. And she was surprised by that explanation, but like, it didn't really go anywhere. And I think I got to the point at the end of that year where I was so desperate. I told her, I think it's a metaphobia, and I think I need to go see an exposure therapist. I am so desperate. I'll do anything at this point. I just don't want to feel this particular fear all day, every day. It's ruining my life. And she worried about that because she said, I don't feel like you're resourced enough. I mean, at the time I was sleep deprived and that kind of thing. And she said, exposure therapists are pretty rough and tough, and not necessarily care about like the trauma that you've had or where you're coming from. It's mostly just start changing your behavior today if you want to get over it. And she was a little bit worried about me, and I said, no, I'm that's fine. I think this is what I need to do.
And what happened from there?
Well, I saw the only exposure therapist that I could afford at the time, and it was a disaster. And I still to this day don't know whether it was her or me, but she was a student, and it was a really, really bad fit. It led me to have like one of my first panic attacks ever. And at first I thought I was willing, although I didn't know that I was supposed to be willing. I thought I was just kind of do the exposures, watch videos of people throwing up, go eat at a restaurant where you feel like you might get food poisoning, that kind of thing. I even went on a roller coaster, and that was my own idea. I was like trying to be creative. But I didn't really do no one really prepared me for what exposure was. I'd never heard the term ERP. I still didn't identify myself as an OCD person. And so I really didn't understand that the kind of, what did you call it? Willing acceptance that you have to go in with it or anything like that. So I tried some things. I tried to be creative. I tried to like kind of not cut corners, but jump ahead in the process just to get it over with, which is why I went on a roller coaster, and I definitely white knuckled that the whole time. And afterwards, I did not feel proud of myself at all. And then it got to the point where I showed up for a session, and she said, okay, I want you to pretend like you're throwing up into this trash can right in front of me. Do it. And for me, I was embarrassed in an acting sort of way. Like that didn't trigger my emetophobia. It triggered my shyness or something. And I really didn't want to do it. And she said, okay, fine, then you're never going to get better. And I just cried and cried until the hour was over. And then I went home and I never saw her again.
That's a really sad story.
Yeah. And I know that it's like, I'm sure she could have, probably treated me with a little bit of the compassion that I had found in my last two therapists. But also part of it was surely me. I know that I was, not understanding, maybe not willing enough, and maybe a little stubborn.
Well, it also sounds like you didn't have appropriate psychoeducation about what was happening. So
Absolutely.
Even now you understand that you were white knuckling and that well, first off, it sounds from what the work that we'll do and talk about here, it sounds like you weren't targeting the right fear.
Right.
That you didn't actually suffer from emetophobia. So from the beginning, that's what made the exposure challenging. But the next thing is you then weren't educated around what it means to do exposure. And then from there, it was seen as like if you weren't willing to do exposure, then you were just being resistant rather than understanding that that might not have been the appropriate exposure for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I could have really used some education for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy that we're all just kind of, floundering about until we find the right, education or knowledge or somebody to guide us. So for me, that came after that sad experience. I went and saw just a really, really expensive, a very experienced psychologist who also did exposure, but had so much more experience. It was literally, the opposite kind of person that I could have found from this exposure therapist, who was so young and just so focused on just one method of fixing anxiety. So I went to this other person, and she had all this background, and she just, like I said, nuance, and she again tried EMDR with me, and she was willing to do exposure as well, but she wanted to kind of get there in a more natural way and get me ready for it. So she was really great, and at that time I finally read Brain Lock, the book by I forget who, Jeffrey Schwartz, I think. And it was, it describes so many different people with OCD, and none of those things I have, but the way that each person, each case that he talked about, the way that those people interacted with the world and themselves and their thoughts just resonated so much with me. Like it just made so much sense. The idea of a sticky mind, that I finally identified as having OCD. And so from there, I think that's the book where his motto is, he tells his clients, like his patients, to say, it's not me, it's my OCD, to recognize that you're having this thought or this fear, this worry that just will not go out of your head, and to say, that's not me, that's OCD. Like that's not what everybody thinks, and that's not what I have to think for the rest of my life. That's OCD. And that was such a revelation. when I read that book. It just felt really good. I think I was just like, listening to it in my car on my commute and just crying like every day. Just felt like
Just
it
gave
really
you so much
spoke to
hope.
me. Yeah. Hmm.
What happened from there?
So from there, I finally realized I OCD. I went to I think I read a couple more books. I finally realized that there's certain behaviors that you do that make it worse. I was reassurance seeking for all my life. I've been reassurance seeking. I had no idea that is a no-no. I had no, and now I can absolutely see how it never helped me. It always made me feel worse. I could never get enough reassurance, whether it was from, you know, checking temperatures or just asking my mom or my loved ones, my husband, is everything going to be okay? Like none of them could give me an answer, or if they did, I knew they were lying. So that's just one example. But
Or that's what your OCD told you?
what?
Or
That they're lying?
Yeah.
Well, I could tell. Like I could tell that my husband was just trying to make me stop crying, and so he'd say, "Yeah, everything's going to be okay." And then I realized, because I know he's not a psychic, that he can't predict the future, and he doesn't know that everything's going to be okay. And that's the whole point.
Exactly.
Yeah. What was I going to say? From there, I went to the OCD conference, where I heard about you, and then COVID happened. So I wasn't able to continue EMDR, because while a lot of therapists went to online work, that particular therapy wasn't doable, over the phone. I mean, over the computer. And but it was kind of a relief because that was a lot of money. And I thought, this might not be the most urgent thing that I need to do. I think the most urgent thing I need to do is to, dig down deep into this, I guess, cognitive behavior, or whatever it is. And my behaviors, I need to stop checking.
And the beliefs that maintain them. So it's about your behavior, but it's also about the beliefs that maintain that behavior.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. Do you want to say a little bit more about where you're at right now?
Right now, and so I just found Huddle. I mean, I just finally signed up for Huddle. And I know that, I think one of the good things about it is that it will keep me accountable. I feel somewhat bad about myself because I know that I'm not doing the best I can. I'm not doing my exposures. But I think I will be ready too soon. I have to fight against, these days, an extreme urge to just kind of sleep the day away. I mean, I don't have any time for that, but if I did have the time, it's all I would do. And I really, really want to avoid, just this year, maybe part of next year. I just want to kind of not have to do a bunch of exposures. I want to skip ahead to being normal. But I'm going to not do that and show up for group sessions and eventually do my exposures, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, thank you so much for describing it like that, because I think that captures the experience of a lot of people, that once they get educated, they kind of know what the path will probably be like, and they just want to skip ahead. And the urge to avoid in a number of different ways, including through sleeping, is just really human.
Yeah.
So thank you for describing that.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend about it, and she also has some. I think she deals with some social anxiety that she doesn't deal with it, actually. And she was really curious about what I've been doing and what I've been learning, and I kind of explained it in the best way I could. And then she said, "That sounds horrible." And I said, "Yeah, it's a little bit like finding out you have cancer, so that's the bad news, right? Like, you have OCD, it's the bad news. The good news is there's a treatment. Like, your cancer is totally treatable. We can absolutely do it. The bad news is it's really going to suck. You're going to have to go through chemo and radiation. We might have to do all, take this part of your body off, but then you'll be healed. So it's kind of good news, bad news, good news.
And how do you maintain hope as you start that process?
I don't know so much about how to maintain hope as much as how to be so desperate for things to be different. That's almost a hope in itself. Like, a lot of, I don't know, what is hope? It's something that keeps you going, or it's like a reason to keep going. I think another reason to keep going is the absolute necessity of it. I don't want to feel like this forever, and I want to be a good mom, and I want to be adventurous, and I don't want to sleep all my life away. Um, and so I have to believe that there's a way out.
Yeah, I believe that for you too. Thank you so much for everything you shared. I look forward to our next session.
Me too. Thank you.
You're welcome.